What's up? What's up? It's your man Sean P coming in live with another brand new Sean P experience. I have a very special guest here on the camera. You see it with me, Dr. Brian H. Williams in the building. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, Sean. Good to meet you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is a blessing. This is an honor. I want to say before we even start, this is a belated Veterans Day for both of us. Happy Veterans Day, sir.
Same to you. Thank you for your service. Even though it
Yes,
was a
sir.
Navy, I respect that still.
Okay, okay. I see what you did with that. I see what you did. Um, Before we get to the nitty gritty of it, I want to ask you a question. In the book you mentioned, in the past, not really big on media and social media, all these things. What's it like becoming an author now? You got book tours, you're doing shows like this. What's that transition like for you?
I I had no concept of this, right? I never planned to become an author. Certainly didn't plan to become a public figure. I like my solitude and my anonymity. I should say I liked it because I don't have that as much now. But it's really been a blessing to be able to meet so many different people from across the country, different walks of life, who are moved by the book and what I talked about in the book, but also want to learn, right? So I'm an educator at my heart. I've been in academic medicine for a long time. I love to teach, and this is sort of an extension of that to teach what I know and what I've seen to a much larger audience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have a fellow doctor in the building. My friend Dr. Ashley Wade in Dallas, Texas is in the building. So shout out to another doctor in the
All
building.
right.
I want to give you a formal introduction before we take off with this plane here. We have Dr. Brian H. Williams, is an Air Force Academy graduate and a Harvard trained surgeon, a former congressional health policy advisor, and a nationally recognized leader at the intersection of public policy and structural racism, gun violence, and health equity. He has treated gun violence victims for more than 2 decades. William has served as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health Policy Fellow at the National Academy of Medicine, as a professor of trauma and acute care surgery at the University of Chicago Medicine. Williams and his work has been featured in outlets like Chicago Tribune, Dallas Morning News, CNN, Newsweek, and now the Sean P. Experience. Give it up for Dr. Williams. I had to
Now I've
add
reached
that
the
in there.
pinnacle. With this show, I reached the pinnacle of my reach.
This is it. This is it. This is it. So you have a very amazing life. You have like 5 lifetimes. Very high achieving in every endeavor. I want to know what was the creative spark that said, you know what, it's time to write a book. What was that moment that says it's time to put it on paper?
Well, I say the moment that was sort of a catalyst to me becoming more of a writer was the event that described in the book, which was the mass shooting of Dallas police officers in July of 2016. And just go back to that time, Sean. Remember, that was the prior presidential election between Clinton and Trump. And that summer, we had the police shooting of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge on July 5th. We had the shooting of Philando Castile in Minnesota on July 6th. You remember that one? That was live streamed on Facebook by his girlfriend. And on July 7th, 2016, there were protests scheduled all across the country. But just go back to through the entire year. About a month before that, there was a mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and there were other shooting deaths throughout the year. So it's kind of this snowball effect that was happening throughout the year. And then on July 7th, like I said, many protests, but the one people may remember, if they remember any at all, is the one from Dallas, because that is the one that turned violent. There was an Army veteran there, and he was targeting police officers, shot 14, and 7 were brought to the hospital where I was working as a trauma surgeon that evening. And I still think about this night. I mean, every day is always kind of with me. Uh, but that was a moment where the violence was escalating. The racial justice was an issue. This election, and I personally and professionally was wrestling with what my role was in society, my family, one of those existential thoughts about how am I going to be a better citizen in this country. And after that experience, losing those officers and what happened afterwards, I just began putting my thoughts down on paper, and that eventually morphed into the book that you've read.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's kind of fast forward in my process in the interview, but we're going through it right now because we're here. You made history that day, being like one of the first trauma surgeons, dealing with this many officers at one time since 9/11. What's it like making history, this big, huge thing, but like it's like the worst day of your life, it sounds like. So what's that contrast like?
Well, just to be clear, like when we have these any gunshot victim, or especially if it's a disaster response like we had that night, this is a team effort, right? And there are many people that were impacted by this event, and I still talk to them up to this day. And they this it's been an emotional event for them as well. The difference between them and me is that mine is kind of played out in public, right? Because of the press conference that occurred a few days later. And this back up, I didn't plan to go to this press conference at first. When I was initially asked to go, I declined. And it was my wife that said, you have to be there. Like the country needs to see that there's a black doctor trying to save these police officers that night. And if you're not there, no one will know. So just show up and just to be seen, which was my plan. But eventually I did speak at this press conference. It was unscripted, unplanned, but it resonated. And that 2-minute clip went viral. And from that point on, uh, I was just kind of this reluctant public figure speaking about all these issues uh, simply because I opened my mouth on camera when the country was watching.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to go back a little bit and then go forward. So in the beginning of your book, you open part one with this James Baldwin quote. I want to read it to you. You said we have. Let me see. Where is it? That wasn't it. Here we go. James Baldwin. The price one pays for pursuing any profession or calling is the intimate knowledge of its ugly side. Tell me what that means to you and what you want the reader to get whenever they read that. Why that James Baldwin?
Yeah, so this is opening up the book, right? So I wanted to put the reader in the frame of mind of what sort of journey we're going on with this story. What it meant to me was at that time, I'd been practicing medicine for 20 something years, right? And as a trauma surgeon, I had seen so much needless death and suffering due to gun violence. But also as a doctor who chose to work in underserved communities at these safety net hospitals, majority of my patients were young Black men. So there is this dichotomy where I'd achieved this level of expertise and excellence and was actually serving my community as a doctor. But what I saw was that the work I was doing was merely being in the hospital was a barometer of what was happening in society around me. So becoming an expert in medicine, I was beginning to see the ugly side of medicine about how we as a nation still choose to deny the most vulnerable access to some basic health care. How we choose to turn a blind eye to the lives that are shattered by gun violence. And that is just unacceptable to me. So I was talking about or deciding, like, what am I going to do? Am I doing enough as a doctor in the hospital? Which clearly it is a noble and necessary profession. But for me, I felt there was so much more that needed to be done. I just had to figure out like how I would be part of the solution.
Let me ask you a question. When you first came to trauma surgery, that profession, or to be a doctor in general, you were on a good track in the Air Force already. Like you were
Yeah.
well on your way in the Air Force, could have had a whole different kind of trajectory. What was the turning point that said, man, I want to go do this? What was that?
I mean, it was truly a calling to medicine. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but I just felt called to the profession that I could spend the rest of my life helping people. And that's what it meant to me to be a doctor was you could actually help people live better lives. So there was just a calling for me to make that transition from, I was an aeronautical engineer doing uh, testing in the Air Force to shifting to becoming a doctor. But it seems like it's a huge shift. But in reality, and I think you'd appreciate this too, being a veteran, is that the leadership skills we learn in the military, teamwork, independence, service to a greater cause, all of those values are translatable into medicine and were important as I went through medical school and my training. So it wasn't like I wasted any time in the military. It really gave me the foundation to be successful in any endeavor that I decided to put my mind to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So most people in the world, whenever these traumatic things happen, you want to run away from it. What makes you get an adrenaline rush? Like, man, like in the book, it sounds like to you it's like game on, Michael Jordan, game seven, time to activate. Could you explain that feeling for you and that adrenaline rush?
Yeah, that was it's kind of what attracted me to trauma surgery. And I mean, for those of your viewers that do not go to medical school, like when we enter medical school, not all of us know what kind of doctor we're going to be. We go to medical school to learn to become a doctor. And then about halfway through, we decide what we're going to specialize in, whether that be obstetrics or internal medicine, emergency medicine. I want to be a trauma surgeon. It was during my rotations as a medical student where I was on call with the trauma team and this gunshot victim came in and they activated, went all out to save this patient. And I said, that's what I want to do. These are my people. I want to do this. It's the fast pace. It's being able to make quick decisions under stress and knowing that you are saving lives. That's what attracted me to trauma surgery. Now, getting to the part where feeling like Michael Jordan, that just comes with training. Michael Jordan, he trained, he goes to practice, he's shooting those jumpers over and over again. So when it comes game time, he's ready to go. Doesn't even think about it. The same thing for trauma surgeon or any specialist in medicine. We go through a lot of training. So when the time comes, when there's a trauma activation, like what you see on TV where it may be fast paced, for me, it's in slow motion, right? I've seen it so many times. You just slow down where you're recognizing what's going on. You can make the decisions in the moment about what needs to be done to ensure this patient has the best outcome. And I think this is my personality. I like that sort of high stress situation.
So I had another question for later on, but I'll use it right now about the zone, the flow. So like you're saying, like is it really like muscle memory from all the training, or is it just something else you can hardly even describe? Whenever that's happening, you're in the moment, the person on the table. Like, is it just training, or is it something else?
I think training is foundational, and that is very important because the more let's just say no for a trauma surgeon you're in the ER working with your emergency medicine colleagues and you have all sorts of things come in car accidents, workplace accidents, sports injuries. I've taken care of people injured at rodeo like uh, rodeos, and of course the gunshots and the stabbings and that sort of community violence. And you begin to see these things over and over and over again. So you start to recognize uh, patterns. You're looking at the vital signs, you're looking at the patient, and it's all about getting more and more reps. So, certainly in medical school and residency, you're getting that foundation to become a better doctor. But in the end, you have to be in the game doing this over and over again. And some people like it. If you don't like doing that, then you're chosen the wrong specialty, you've chosen the wrong profession. I really enjoy it. It's fun for me. But also on top of that, is I'm always learning, right? I'm always learning from the books and going to conferences, but from the people around me, right? You get to be around smart, dedicated people all the time that are making me better trauma surgeon. So that teamwork aspect of it all is also very important for making me a better trauma surgeon.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I love going into the writing process with my author guests. I have a lot of my audience are writers and they're future writers. I want to advise them. So you have all this schooling and all this time in the Air Force, all the things you did way before wanting to be a writer. What kind of advantage did you have coming to writing this with all that in your background, scholarly wise? But also, what was the contrast like writing for your medical school stuff versus writing this for the average everyday consumer?
Right. So, discipline was key, right? Discipline learned in the military, discipline going through medical school and surgical training. You sort of the same sort of discipline as a writer, especially if you're going to write a book. It is not an easy endeavor to get through writing a book, especially for a first-time author such as myself. Now, you asked about the contrast between this and my medical school writing. Yeah, writing for medicine, it's very different. There's little personality. I'm This is my opinion, right? It's very regimented. There's a way you do things. There's little personality that comes into it. Is you're giving out the facts in a very specific format, and I was very good at that. I've done a lot of that. Translating that to writing a book, my first step was I began writing a lot of op-eds. Excuse me. So I wrote medical writing that would go into peer-reviewed journals, moved to op-eds. So putting combining my experience as a trauma surgeon, the scholarly academic part, knowing how to interpret data, and then translating that into a format that would be accessible to someone who is not in medicine, and then submitting that into media like local newspaper, national newspaper, online media outlets to continue this means of teaching others beyond the profession. That's my first step. Not planned. That's just kind of how it happened. Because even during then, I wasn't planning to write a book. That was not my plan at the time. Now, the book, how I got to the book was after the shooting. I was, this is, like I said, I still think about this every day. And I was a different person before the shooting and after the shooting. But after the shooting, this is a really traumatic event for me. And I shut down. I just kind of turned into myself, cut myself off from everyone around me, and including my wife, who I talk about in the book. But for me, what I was doing at the time also was keeping a journal. So that was how I was getting my thoughts out in a journal. And then fast forward a little bit later, I went into therapy, and then going through therapy was led to turning that journal into a book. Not by intent. It was kind of an organic process. I had all these notes, all these journal entries, and I thought, there's a story here, put it together, and not just make it a diary for you to read, but how can I teach you about something I learned after going through this event? How could I take my experience, put it into words, make it entertaining to you, and also educational? And that was the fun part for me as an author, was going through that entire process, which was years. Okay, it was years to get that done.
So whenever you're writing like this, as far as your editors and even the publisher, maybe was there any like pushback whenever you're going back and forth with them about your process and what you're trying to distill to the average everyday person?
Well, so that's a very good question. I should have clarified that when I was beginning first writing the book, I wasn't writing it with the intent of getting it published. I was writing a book for myself. Um, and then when I finally got an agent, I should probably clarify this. An editor reached out to me who had seen many of my op-eds and thought, hey, maybe you should write a book. At the time, I had a book. I thought it wasn't really, I thought it was a book. In the end, it was needed a lot more work. Then got an agent to represent me to get the deal with the publisher. So agent, editor, publisher. Agent gets the deal, and from that point on, she kind of stays in the background. The publisher is waiting for the product to be finished. So most of my experience was with the editor, back and forth with her throughout the writing process, and there was no pushback. In fact, she was very important in making me pull out things that I was avoiding. Right, because I'm writing a memoir, so to memoir, you need to really dig deep and put that on paper and share that with people who are strangers. So she would read something and say, Brian, I think you're holding something back here. I don't know what it is, but you're holding something back. Like go back and dig deep into that. So she was very good about helping me pull out stories that I was trying to avoid. And then at some point I clicked. I just said, you know what, Brian, just write this book as if no one's going to read it. Because you can censor yourself if you're worried about what people will say. Just write it and be done. And in the end, that's what I felt was important for me to be able to put this stuff onto paper to be shared with the world. So right now, Sean, you've read the book.
Yes,
You know a lot. You know a lot more about me than I'll ever know about you, probably, because
I'm sure.
it's in
I'm
there.
sure.
It's
I'm
in
sure.
there.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So in the book, at some points, you went through a lot of technical details about like what happens from the moment a person come in with the ambulance to the teams getting ready, you getting ready, what's happening. Like a quarterback describing a play. Like the running back does this, the wide receiver doing that, and you breaking everything down in nuanced detail. Tell me about your artistic choice to do it in that kind of detail. And again, was there like any pushback, like where it's too much detail, or how did that conversation go?
Well, short answer, no. There was never any pushback, and it's one of the reasons I chose my publisher and editor, because I knew we would be able to work really well together, and I would have a lot of input as an author. Um, so there was that was a very good working relationship. Why I chose to do that, because even though I wanted to teach you something as a reader, and I wanted to inspire you to action at the end, I knew I had to make it entertaining, and I put that in quotes. I had to draw you into the story. I didn't want it to be a lecture, like I'm telling you these things and you need to do whatever. I wanted to pull you into the story so you are seeing things as I'm seeing them and you're experiencing them. I want you to experience those emotions and those feelings as if you were there with me. And I wanted it to be graphic, but not gratuitous, right? I wanted, if you're a doctor and you read this, you would say, okay, that is accurate. If you have never been in an emergency room, you could read that and you could follow the story, right? You wouldn't be put off by too much technical jargon. You would understand what we do in a trauma activation. And you can understand what happens to these victims that come in that are near death due to gun violence. So that was just a narrative. That's a story to pull you in. On top of that, I interwove my thoughts and my transformation, but also trying to teach you about bigger issues, not just about health, about how we talk about systemic racism, how policy impacts our lives, health equity. I had these grand ambitions with this book, and that's why it took years for it to get done.
Let me tell you, sir, my first night reading this book, I was at work at the hospital in the emergency room. And within me starting to read this book, you open up with this traumatic scene, right? We had a GSW come in as I'm reading this chapter. Then we had another guy come in 45 minutes later with a crazy stab wound. Looked like he got cut with a saw or something. It was the craziest knife wound ever. And I'm reading your story about talking to the families and what that looked like, what happens. It was just, it was playing out in my real life behind me as I'm reading your book the first night. It was just, you did a real good job of putting that scene out for a person that's not aware of how that goes.
Thanks, thank you. I wanted to humanize everyone. I wanted to humanize the victims who we can't overlook them in this narrative of gun violence, right? Especially when these victims are from racial minority groups. For me, it's been, most of them have been young Black men. But also want to humanize the healthcare workers, right? We are not automatons and robots doing this work. This impacts us as well. So I wanted any reader, no matter what your background is, I wanted you to feel as if you could be any of these people in the story,
That's
the
right.
victims, the survivors, the healthcare workers, and try to inspire empathy. Because if you can connect with people whom you've never met, maybe that can lead to change and to action.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So also, you chose to read your own audiobook to go along. I love whenever authors these days are doing more and more of doing their own narration. Tell me about your experience, because that's a whole different universe. Tell me about how was it going to the booth? What was it like? Was it harder or easier than you thought? How was that?
It was infinitely more difficult than I anticipated doing. I really wanted to read the book. It's a memoir. It's my story. I really, really wanted to read it myself, which is, just so you know, that's not a guarantee, right? That's between you and the publisher. That works, and because you need to get a separate audio publisher to do this, so it's not always guaranteed that you, as an author, can read a book even if you want to. I was fortunate that it worked out for me. It took about 30 something hours in the studio to read the entire book. It's much more difficult than I anticipated. I thought I wrote the book, it's my story, walk in, speaking to a mic, and be done. But for one, technically, you're in a soundproof room, and these microphones are very sensitive, so they pick up everything. So, you and I talking, but there's smacking and popping that will the mic will pick up that will end up in the recording. So it's a constant. So I'll be like, we went to the ER and checked on this patient. Up, stop, smacking, go back, read it again. So there's a lot of that. However, I enjoyed the experience. I felt the book is much more meaningful because I read it. People who have actually listened to the audiobook tell me that it's a different experience for them since I read the book. And if I never write another book, I can always say that I wrote a book that was published and I narrated it. And if that was it, I can consider that a success.
Yes, sir. Well, I enjoyed the audio version. I played it over and over and over again. I even do immersion reading where I'm listening to it while I'm reading the hardback simultaneous, man. And you did an
That's
amazing
dedication,
narration
huh?
job.
That's dedication.
I try. I try. I'm gonna do a thorough job for the show. I'm gonna do a thorough job, right? But I tell you what, you have a promising future in narration, sir. You're gonna be a full-time narrator. You got my green thumb. I
uh,
listen to you all day.
those that do it for a living, like we need to give them some respect because
Yes,
that is,
it
yeah.
is difficult. It's very difficult. It is very difficult. So let me ask you a question. This is kind of more of a fun question, a little lighthearted question. They have all these hospital shows out there. A lot of us love them. Grey's Anatomy, you name it. Do you ever watch any of these shows in your free time, your limited free time? And if so, do any of these shows get it right, in your opinion?
I have not watched any of the medical dramas since ER. ER, I, I love that show. That was a great show. And from what I went to medical school when it first came on. I was an engineer, not in medicine, really into it. Went to medical school, kind of got out of it because I was so busy. But for me, that was pretty accurate and realistic about what's going on. The other show I think that I really enjoyed is Scrubs, which is a comedy, right? It's a comedy, but I watched that show and like those characters, they're people I know. I think that's a pretty realistic show. The other shows that are out there, I have not watched. But I don't have an opinion about them, whether they're good or bad. I just haven't watched them. I know they're very popular, but for me, I'm at the point now where I want to see a show that centers the black doctor, right? And I haven't seen that. There's always a black doctor in the cast, but like center that experience, what it means to be a black doctor in a majority white profession where you're trying to care for people. I think that's something that would actually interest me to watch. So that's where I am. But I do know that many of these shows are out now, and I know some of my doctor colleagues and nurse colleague friends that watch them. They say they're accurate, they're entertaining, but nothing's really pulled me in. Just so you know, I spend my time. I'm a science fiction geek, okay? So I read a lot of science fiction and watch a lot of sci-fi shows. So give me the opportunity between a medical drama and science fiction, I'm going sci-fi all the time.
Now I find it interesting because over the years in the hospital, once again, in the break room or in passing, I ask my nurse or doctor friends, "You ever watch this? You ever watch that?" They always like, I guess because they're doing it. I mean, in my opinion, I guess they just want to detach from whatever
Right.
they're doing. So they're like, "I'm not watching that in my free time."
It's probably the same, the cop shows. Do law enforcement watch these cop shows? I don't know. The legal show, like who knows? Maybe if you're too into the profession, watching a television show may be less interesting to you because it's too
Mhm,
much of
mhm.
your real life.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have a question from the chat. I love questions from the chat. How old were you when you started med school? Is the question. How old were you?
I was
Started med.
28. I was
28
20,
years old.
28. So I began when most people were graduating. So I had my career in the Air Force. I was on active duty for 6 years and then went to medical school after that, which was good. So when I showed up, I was less concerned about will I be top of the class than can I learn everything I need to learn to be a good doctor. My mindset was much different, I think, because of that experience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So my next question is: you mentioned in your childhood you traveling a lot, having friends of different backgrounds, ethnicities, things like that. What kind of advantage you think you had growing up, being with so many different races of people? What kind of advantage was that in your life for traveling so much?
Yeah, I think that. this is something any military brat can probably relate to, is that we're moving around. My dad's in the Air Force, 23 years in the Air Force. So I was born in an Air Force hospital, grew up on Air Force bases, went to the Air Force Academy. So Air Force is kind of in my blood. But growing up, you get to experience the world. You see different parts of the country, for one. We lived in Japan for a while as well. So you see the world. So you're seeing cultural differences from everywhere, but also your circle of friends growing up are also having the same experience, right? So my understanding of diversity and inclusivity and humanity was formed by those childhood experiences, right? These were just like we were just kids traveling the world with our parents who were serving our country. Um, so definitely an important part of my childhood, which, back then I didn't recognize that, because for me, that's how everybody lived, I assumed, right? I didn't realize that living on an Air Force base was something unique until I was getting up much older. Um, but as an adult, I see how that informed how I view the world and how I want to treat everyone around me with the same degree of humanity that I want to be treated myself.
Yes, sir. And I will take that and go straight into this very a controversial but important topic, right? I'm gonna just say the N word for the sake of my podcast, not to get flagged or anything. But I've been wanting to discuss this on air for years now. Haven't had a chance to do it, but your book brought it right there. Uh, Randall Randall Kennedy, his book, The N Word. I read that book a couple years ago, right? There's a certain passage in here. He said, "This is why the Arabs are called sad N words, the Irish are called the N-words of Europe, and the Palestinians are called N-words in the Middle East, right? Explaining what we experience, N-word perpetuates the caste system by crushing the core of what makes us human. It dehumanizes. Tell us about the impact of the N-word. So many people use it loosely, casually. I try to avoid using it as much as I can personally. Everybody got their own take. Talk about that experience for you, sir.
I mean, let's be clear, it's the most vile word in existence, and it serves only one purpose, right? Is to dehumanize Black people. And when it's used to describe other people that are not Black, I mean, that it's trying to tie them to anti-Black racism. Now, in the book, we get to that because I was talking about how I was a resident, I was actually an intern when 9/11 happened, and post 9/11, the anti-Muslim racism became normalized in the country, and describing how I was being treated as a medical student, as a resident, having been called the N word, having been told to take out the trash, do all these things that were people, even though as a doctor, it was like, you come take out my trash, I'm gonna call you the N word. And then after 9/11, things kind of shifted for a bit in this country, right? Suddenly Black people were not the most reviled group of Americans for a minute. It was palpable. And I was just using that to describe how we always find a way to demean someone, to categorize someone when it suits our purposes. And when I say our, those in power, right, will find a way. And even as a prior Air Force officer, Harvard trained surgeon, spending my life trying to serve humanity and save lives at every stage of my medical career. At some point, I've been called the N word by colleagues, patients. It's come up, but I went one step further, right? It's not just being, somebody saying it to you. Is that I said you can be called that without even saying the word, and that's how we can be marginalized in our workplaces because of our race, and how we sometimes we have. I should say we have to. How I felt I had to do what I could to not appear threatening to those around me in order for me to succeed as a doctor.
Yeah, you speak about in the book about having to assimilate and all these things like that. You speak about that because they got doctors in the room and future doctors like in that medical world having to try to. If you appear too much one way, you might get, I guess, ostracized or you get canceled out. And if you're too much the other way, how do you play that double consciousness that Du Bois talk about, right?
Yeah, this is probably an experience that is not unlike any Black professional may experience. Uh, just in medicine, uh, less than 3% of doctors are Black men, right? So you're already in a profession where there's a dearth of role models, and I felt that if I did not perform well, someone coming up behind me may suffer, right? Carrying that weight, not just the weight of the job of saving lives and caring for patients, but also who else they want to enter the profession. And look, Sean, I think that's good weight. That's good weight to carry, but it's a reality, right? And also, concerns about, hey, if I want to get this good fellowship or this good job, someone may call somebody or has to write this letter, and any little slight could impact that, right? We're running twice as fast to get half as far. And I wanted to put that in the book to say, look, even everything I've done, I have felt that way. Now, whether you think that is actually warranted or not is irrelevant, right? This is about how I felt. And we can talk all day about whether that's the reality in the workplace.
It's important for everybody to read and understand that because most of us regular citizens that's not in medicine, like you're a doctor. It's like, man, you think that there's exemptions. You're a doctor with the white coat, like you said, officer and all of these things. You still get treated a certain way. And that's important for
Oh,
everybody to understand and hear.
yeah, that's and look, when I'm in a hospital, I'm in my scrubs, maybe in my white coat. It's the one thing. When I'm outside the hospital, I don't have doctor stamped across my forehead. So this is the society we live in. And just look at the election, right? We cannot even pretend that anti-black racism is not alive and well in this country. But we've been around. We still show up. You and I each took an oath to serve this country because I don't know about I can speak for you, but I still believe that we need to do the work to continue pushing to ensure that the country lives out to the values it professes in the Constitution, right? Our ancestors suffered much worse than we did to get us here. So there is no excuse for me to stop doing the work now.
So in the book, you mentioned a moment in the book, almost kind of like Henry Louis Gates. I thought about you were getting pulled over in your car driving and things like that, even though you're a doctor, man. Like tell me some of the mindset of that as it's happening in real time. Like, do you even tell them like, man, I'm a doctor? Or do you even tell them like, man, do you know who I am? Or is it kind of
Oh,
like just
I
take it
don't
on the
do
chin?
that.
Like,
I no, I don't do that. I know enough not to get to get into any verbal back and forth with law enforcement, right? But I did simple things I thought were self-protective. I had an Air Force Academy. On your license plate, you can get those little things that say alumni or whatever school. I had mine said Air Force Academy. Take my wallet out of my back pocket ahead of time, put it on the center console. So if I am pulled over, I can say, "Hey, there's my wallet. I'm gonna get my ID for you." Uh, just little things that, in my mind, would signal de-escalation if necessary. Because, like, even before the videos that came out 10, 15 years ago, like we knew this was happening, just wasn't widely known. So now we see that this is true. Being black and getting pulled over, even for routine stops, can be deadly. And I did not want to be a victim, not just because of what I saw on the news, but what I learned from my relatives and my family, right? We have the oral history that tells us otherwise.
yes, sir, yes, sir. Let's speak about something else that's very scary. The history in the medical world of using our bodies for experimentation. You spoke about practice earlier in the 10,000 hours and things you need to get your reps. But unfortunately, they use our bodies a lot to get that practice, always have. Some folks think that's a myth. Whenever we say that, they think we just talking. That's a myth. The government wouldn't do that. You talk about that a lot in the book, these cases. Talk about that a little bit, about the history of that in this country.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about this in the book, I'm putting two contrasting things together. One is the long history of exploitation of Black bodies for medical research. And then two, I say, well, I, as a surgeon, have actually benefited from all this and the techniques that I use in the operating room and the medicines that I prescribe. So I'm putting these two together and saying, look, here's what we've done. I recognize that I've benefited from this and using it. However, like we need to talk about the history, right? People, I think most people are somewhat aware of Tuskegee and that experiment, but I try to show in the book that there was stuff happening long before Tuskegee, right? And Tuskegee was a federal authorized and funded program to study the long-term effects on syphilis on Black men. Even though there was a cure, penicillin, they were not given that cure. So what happened? They got sick, they infected their partners, their children, just so the government can see how this disease progressed. People know about that. Let's go back, centuries to J. Marion Sims, who was performing vaginal operations on enslaved women without anesthesia. Like this was so barbaric that they'd have people holding them down, these women, while he mutilated their reproductive organs. He developed instruments that are still used to this day. The techniques he developed are still used to this day. So it has helped many, many women, but at what cost? There was another study in the 60s where they were doing whole body irradiation of people. Most of them were Black or poor. They wanted to test the effect of a nuclear bomb. What that would mean. Again, funded by the government. And this most of these people died from this, just too much radiation. And the person that ran the experiment, a doctor, he was awarded like the highest award you can get for radiologists, right? So here's the point, right? We just can't ignore history and pretend it didn't happen. It's happened. We cannot change that, right? But to be in this day and age and pretend it didn't happen is a disservice to our trainees. But it's also a disservice to society. So let's recognize that yes, we've done some barbaric and horrific things to humans in this country. We are here where we are now. To say it didn't happen or didn't matter is a disservice, as I said. And if I'd known this when I was a medical student, I wish I'd been taught this as a student, right? So I wish I'd known this a lot sooner. And I think most students they are savvy enough and smart enough to recognize that this is in the past. However, they shouldn't go forward being ignorant of how they benefited from all this horrific experimentation that's been done in the past. And I would say this one again, it's still happening now, right? It's still going on. It's just kind of evolved. We still use marginalized, poor Black people are enrolled in these experiments at a higher rate than their white counterparts. And that's just the way the system is set up to exploit those who have no voice.
I want to pad that conversation with COVID-19 whenever all these vaccines came out. And then so many people are upset because Black people wasn't like flocking out to go and get the vaccines and everything. But like, we had a real reason to be apprehensive. And I mean, we know the history, we know the stories, we know what happens in the experimentation. So talk about that, about like so many lives are lost because they wouldn't get the vaccine. They wouldn't go out there and get something that might have benefited them. I don't know.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge the lived experience people. And there is a disconnect between the medical profession and those that we're trying to serve during this once in a century pandemic. Even when we knew that Black people were going to be hit hard by this pandemic, not because they were Black, but because being Black is a proxy for all these other social determinants that continue to put certain people at disadvantage. Segregated communities, lack of access to health care, no health insurance. We were going to suffer as a result. But the history tells us to be distrustful of healthcare. So if you remember back during the worst days of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about we needed trusted messengers to get the word out to communities to get the vaccine. And that right there says all you need to know, right? If you say you need trusted messengers, if you are a doctor, that should be enough. But now you know that there is distrust of the healthcare profession, rightfully so, because of this history, right? And if people are thinking, why don't they distrust us? If you don't know the history, then you wouldn't understand. That's why teaching history is extremely important.
Now let's do a big pivot point to the major part of the book, the turning point in your life. We are talking about 7/7 in Dallas, Texas, one of the most tragic days in U.S. history. Um, Talk about the complexity of that because most times the stereotype is when there's this mass shooting kind of situation, we hear it on the news like, man, it's probably one of other people. But it was a brother doing this situation, and all these racial things leading up to it, all the racial tension leading up to it. Not saying he was justified and right, but everything that led up to that moment. Talk about
Yeah, so this is where I'm showing my anger, my frustration is intersecting with this shooter, right? And a lot of what we know about his mindset is because of the SWAT negotiator that talked to him for hours, trying to get him to give himself up. Like he recorded the conversation, so he was there that day with the intent of killing white police officers. That was what he wanted to do. That's what he told the SWAT negotiator. Now I'm at the hospital. I'm unaware of any of this, right? For where I'm at, these police officers come in and we were taking care of these police officers. So I learned all this after the fact. But he was upset about Solano Castile and Alton Sterling and the other brothers that had been shot and killed over the course of actually more than a year before that as well. And he wanted exact his revenge. His means of protest was to uh, kill police officers. And what was a peaceful protest, right? Leading up to that point, police officers and protesters were taking selfies. By all accounts, it was, they didn't agree on everything, but it was peaceful. It was a peaceful protest, and that changed everything when he decided to shoot these police officers. And from the moment the 7 officers came to the hospital where I was working, 3 died. Uh, that's when in the aftermath of that, is when I thought, like, this is not working out. The violence is escalating. At the time, it was Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. All this was happening. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm in the hospital doing this when there was so much bigger stuff happening outside. Am I in the right spot? Am I doing the right things? How can I be part of the solution as opposed to being a spectator to all of this violence and death? And that is the pivot points in my life, and the pivot point in the book as well. So everything after that is about what I decided to do to be I guess, a better citizen in this country.
well, so many people have the perception of I'm gonna change it from the inside of the machine, right? I was blessed to interview this ex New York City police officer, and he joined the academy to try to change the police and stuff for black and brown people, but it was kind of too much to overcome. He had to pretty much get out of it and try to make change. So is it kind of sort of like that for you when it comes to that medical side of it and what you were experiencing?
So man, I wrestle with that. Eventually, I decided. Well, first I had to leave Dallas for a while. I I was just known for that. That's how people knew me, and I didn't want to. It's hard. It was hard for me to, no matter where I went, like, oh, you're the guy from the police shooting, right? And so I needed to leave. I went to Chicago for a while, worked on the south side of Chicago, another very violent region. And then I'm seeing these connections. I've been in Tampa, Boston, Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago. It's like Groundhog Day. The same things happen over and over again. Like, so I'm like realizing there's something so much bigger than what's happening here. And here I can only plug holes in the dike. How do we be part of the solution? And so that is when you said working from the inside versus the out. I decided I had to get outside of the system, the healthcare system. And that's when I went to DC and worked as a congressional health policy advisor, working on policy that I felt could impact healthcare and improve the lives of millions. And then from there, I actually ran for Congress last year, and figuring like another way to make a difference is to get outside the healthcare system. But hey, leave that system, get right back into it. You're going into another system that may be just as bereft and dysfunctional, and probably if not
So all
more.
of
So
these,
who knows?
all of these systems, you know, what I'm saying,
Right.
trying to dismantle
But
these systems.
yeah, but I've been trying to work to bring like my experience as a doctor in this healthcare system that that really in many ways profits off of the death and suffering of Black people, right? Financially profits, but they profit during research studies. Like there's means of profiting off of this in an attempt to make people better, right? Backing it up with the data and the research. I've been in academics my entire medical career. Like I know how to do a research study. I can read a paper and say if that's good or bad. I can give you the data and then take that and show how policy can impact that, all that, and translate that so it is accessible to a wider audience of people that can make a difference. Because as a doctor, I can only do so much. But a doctor together with a local politician, that's power. You add in some people that are working in law or social sciences, all working on the same problem from different areas of expertise. That is a sort of power. That's a sort of organizing that can make a difference. And the important part of that is having everyone being able to communicate about these issues with the same sort of language, with the eye on the same sort of results. That's the fun part. I think that's fun. Not easy, but fun.
But fun, but fun. You mentioned living in all these different areas. Educate us on the trauma desert. I have never in my life heard the term trauma desert. We know about food deserts. Educate us on trauma deserts.
So, in short, any healthcare desert is where there is a lack of healthcare services to accommodate the population that is there. So, you mentioned food deserts, same sort of thing, right? We talk about food deserts where there's certain neighborhoods that don't have access to fresh fruit and groceries. A trauma desert is an area where there is an absence of a trauma center, which means that if you were injured, car accident, workplace accident, gunshot, they do not have the expertise there needed to save your life. So mortality is higher. Now in the book I talk about that there's been they've been shutting down trauma centers, creating trauma deserts, and the communities that are suffering the most are majority Black communities that have high levels of endemic violence. So the point is, why close down the centers where people actually need your expertise? And let's keep adding on to that, Sean. There are uh, pharmacy deserts. That was a problem during COVID because getting the vaccine, if you can't get to the hospital, they said, well, go to your pharmacy. Well, if you don't have a pharmacy in your area, where are you going to go? They said, well, if you can't go to the pharmacy, go to your grocery store because some of them have pharmacies. Well, guess what? A lot of these same areas didn't have grocery stores either. Now, these seem like they're in different spots, but if you look at the map, where you have trauma deserts, you also find pharmacy deserts, food deserts. You also, if you need, if you're pregnant, there's going to be an absence of maternal care, so maternal deserts. If you need long-term care, you're elderly, you can be an absence of long-term care facilities as well. And it just so happens that many of these places are in the poorest of the neighborhoods, racially segregated neighborhoods. So it's just one sort of problem stacked on top of another, which is why I realized that as a doctor, my impact was limited, right? We need a concerted effort to address all of the social issues that lead to these. How do we give good jobs, quality education, uh, stable housing, all these things that lead to endemic violence? Let's reverse those, and again improve healthcare. So that's what I'm talking about with the trauma desert. It's not just a trauma desert; it's like a desert of many things that
Many.
keep us healthy and safe in our communities.
You also mentioned that it's a misnomer because a desert is a natural occurring phenomenon in nature, but these things are happening on purpose. They're not just naturally happening.
Exactly. Like I said, they intentionally closed down trauma centers in these areas.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We
Now, you
and you can talk.
mentioned
Yeah.
for a healthy adult, I would say, you mentioned the distance that you can like take off 26 years of your life if you live in the wrong distance. Like in Boston, it was 0.5 miles could equal 33 years. 0.5 miles is like that's nothing, right? Atlanta, 5.5 miles equal 25 year gap in your life. Tampa, 2 miles, the 15-year gap in life. That's a
Right.
very relatively short distance versus your health, you know, health.
It's absolutely absurd, right, and indefensible. One of the first studies I saw came out of NYU that talked about life expectancy, and we can actually narrow down to zip codes where the worst health outcomes are, where you have the highest infant mortality, where you have the highest rate of late stage breast cancers, where you have or late stage breast cancers, where you have the highest rate of gun violence deaths. And you can narrow down the zip codes. You can connect the dots to the policies, historical policies that go back generations that led to these segregated communities where we divest um, businesses, where we divest in education, where we divest in housing. Because the reality is, Sean, most of the things that keep us healthy have nothing to do with you seeing a doctor. That's about 6% of seeing a doctor is what's keeping you healthy. About 20% is your genetics. You can't change that. But the rest is about the social determinants, right? These are the things that where you live, work, and play that keep us healthy. Do you have a stable home? Do you have a good quality education? Are you getting adequate nutrition? There's so much that had nothing to do with seeing a doctor that keep us healthy, and we've created these communities where that is absent. And one last thing, Sean, since you got me on this subject, we now have, or we've had for a while, places. You heard of the school to prison pipeline? School to prison. We now have zip codes where it's cradle to prison. Cradle to prison.
Cradle.
If you're a black male born in this zip code, the likelihood of you ending up in the criminal justice system is extremely high, right? And it's not because we are morally bankrupt individuals, right? There is a lot of issues that go into that, and I'm not going to minimize uh, individual responsibility, but let's be real, right? There's so much more to it than just that.
So is that like a book or a study we can go and find? We can go look that up online. Is that something accessible?
Yeah, so this some of the stuff I'm citing is from the Department of Justice, the FBI. I can't remember the exact name, but I will send this to
Okay.
you later. It's also in my book. It's cited in there.
Okay.
Um, if you Google NYU, New York University life expectancy, they'll take you to their website where you can look at where you live and compare um, life expectancy in your zip code to maybe your neighbor,
Wow.
which is maybe a mile away. And that's what's really disturbing, right? You
Wow.
said like a half-mile difference in your life expectancy drops 30 years. Like
30 years.
what is it about that makes a difference,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes,
So
sir.
this I find that fascinating work. And like you
So
said, you mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois earlier. He talked about this in the 19th century, right? This is
yes,
nothing new.
yes, yes. So your book came out, of course, a good little while ago, right? The election just happened days ago. So we talked about the health disparities and stuff like that. And we all know the new administration, he's talking about taking certain things away and certain people are going to be affected by those healthcare things he's going to change. Talk about that and your concerns about that, being an expert on this matter.
Well, I'm extremely concerned what this means for healthcare. They've been antagonistic and hostile to healthcare for a long time. There's no secret. They're very open about this. And we see, and beneath that, this is an issue of health equity, right? So why in this country are we working to take away healthcare from people? And we know that when you do that, people that suffer the most are Black and Brown people who already have barriers to getting healthcare. Now, I can easily make the humanitarian argument that just as good humans in a country with this much wealth and expertise, we should take care of our citizens by providing health care. There's plenty of economic studies that shows that there's an economic argument, right? A healthy society is a productive society as well. So I'm very concerned what this would mean for women's comprehensive health, for the Affordable Care Act, for the price of medications, what this means for our children's health uh, as well. There is so much to be concerned by. We could spend an entire another show just talking about that, but we don't stop, right? We've been here before. This is nothing new. We continue to get up, go to work, and do what we can to ensure that we can protect healthcare, especially for the most vulnerable in this country.
So to go with the Donald Trump thing a little bit more when it comes to gun violence, I saw some a couple of days ago saying that Trump plans to have like concealed carry throughout the nation, not just certain states anymore. You know all about gun violence up close. What is these kind of things going to do when it comes to the gun violence conversation? What we're trying to stop, city by city.
Well, we can definitely expect that there will be a halt, if not reversal, in much of the progress we've made on gun violence prevention in the last few years. And let's just summarize that. When I served as a health policy advisor, I was in the office of Senator Chris Murphy, who led the charge on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed in 2022. That happened after the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And that was the most significant gun safety bill in a generation. And it did a lot: expanded background checks, money for community violence intervention programs, intimate partner violence. A year later, the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. A year after that, the Surgeon General put out his report declaring this a public health crisis. And just a few weeks ago, President Biden, gave more executive orders to prevent gun violence. Now, with the next administration, we expect all that to stop, and some of it will definitely go away. You mentioned this concealed carry plan. This is constitutional or no concealed, sorry, CCR, concealed carry reciprocity. What does that mean? Some states have laws that allow you to carry a concealed weapon with a permit. Some do not. If this law passes, no matter where you're licensed, if you're licensed to have a concealed carry permit, you can go to any state in the country with a concealed weapon. That's all it needs. So what does that mean? There'll be a lot more people that are not necessarily trained out there carrying concealed weapons, no matter where you go. Let me tell you this, Sean, as a doctor, okay, I can only practice medicine in the states where I am licensed. So, licensed in Texas, I can't go to Washington without to practice medicine without uh, going through the process of getting licensed there. However, I can walk in and buy a gun today, very little difficulty, get a concealed carry permit, and if this law passes, travel anywhere in the nation with that gun. So that is the world we are potentially entering with this administration when it comes to gun violence prevention.
Yeah, we just saw days ago at Tuskegee University. There's a very big mass situation going on there, unfortunately. And even in my small city where I live, 2 weeks ago, my daughter had the homecoming game, homecoming court, and she won the homecoming queen and everything. I was going there to escort her.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much for that. I was going there to escort my daughter for the football game, and before the game could even start, during the tailgating festivities, there was a big shooting, pandemonium situation that took place. Man, it's just, what do you think on your side that you're seeing, global, across the nation? What can we do to even prevent these kind of things from happening, man? Because in both of those stories, there was a lot of law enforcement there, sheriffs, state troopers, but they're inside the event. These things are happening in the parking lot. They're happening, along the way around the event, not in the event. So it's like you can't really even do anything almost about it. It seems impossible to corral.
Yeah, that's great. I'll talk first about what we can do, and then I'll give you a resource you can reference. But first is just recognize that we don't just have a gun violence problem in this country. We have multiple types of gun violence, right? Mass shootings, uh, suicides, intimate partner violence, the preventable shootings. We have community violence. And each of those has different root causes. So if you have different causes, the solutions are different as well. The way you approach reducing suicides may not be the same as you approach community violence or school shootings, right? There's certainly some overlap, but we need to recognize that this is has very diverse root causes that need to be addressed. That's why it's important to have critical thinkers that are making these policies to keep us safe. Second, the presence of law enforcement. This has been shown over and over again. It's not going to always prevent these shootings, right? So let's just erase that as a solution, because sometimes the problem requires a screwdriver, not a hammer, to solve, right? Next, these school shootings, a lot of them are school adjacent, right? They're not in the halls of the schooling, they're adjacent to the school, just as you mentioned those two there. So many different solutions to address all these. So it's going to require one, I mean, having people that are experts in the data as well, but that's not the solution. People in the community need to be part of the solution as well, because those that are closest to the problem often have the best solutions, right? So we need to work together on that. Our elected officials have to be part of the solution. So it involves many different people looking at this problem from different angles to solve that, and recognizing that different types of gun violence require different types of solutions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. I have two questions for you before we get out of here, man. So you mentioned earlier about the adrenaline rush and you loving that feeling. Whenever you transition out, what do you do now to get that itch scratched? I know some athletes when they leave the sport, they have the hardest time trying to find the next thing to feel that emotion for. So what was that for you when you transition out? What's that?
Well, I mean, you caught me kind of still in the midst of that transition, right?
Yeah.
So my campaign ended back in March, but I took the time to just take a breather, right? Because I've been running nonstop since I was 18, Sean. By the time I went to basic training at the academy, being on active duty, going to medical school training, all that stuff, been going nonstop for a long time, and being on the campaign trail, that's no joke. So took a pause and really thinking about, okay, what am I going to do next, right? How am I going to continue to use my experience as as a veteran, what I learned there, my experience as a trauma surgeon, as a policy expert, and continue to use that to make the country safer, to create a world that we're proud to leave to our children, to uplift the lives of the most needy in this country. So I'm enjoying not having that adrenaline rush all the time right now, because it gives me some time to clear my head and think. However, I'm getting back to it real soon. So it's things are afoot. Like
Okay.
I can't be
Okay.
idle for too long.
I don't think so, sir. Next, my friends and I discussed this recently. How do you define success whenever you were the trauma surgeon? Because unfortunately, within the book, whenever you're reading this, a lot of these folks don't make it. You deal with a lot of death. That's a part of the game. So how do you gauge success in the field where a lot of these folks in a bad before they even come, they're already in a bad situation anyway? You're trying to give a hail mary and save them, but how you define success in that, sir?
Yeah, for me, I define success is if I am still impacted by the death and suffering of my patients, right? If that still bothers me, I know I still have held on to that part of my humanity. Once I don't care and they just become numbers, then I know it's time for me to move on. But I still want that pain, right? I want that pain of knowing that when someone is injured, their lives are changed, or they die and their families are suffering, that I still care. That makes me want to become better. Makes me want to be a better, technician, technically surgeon, but also a better teacher to future doctors, but also a better shoulder to cry on for the family members of the patients that I can't save. So for me, success is
Mm.
just knowing that when I leave, um, this part of me that still hurts when someone's life is changed due to a horrific injury or death.
You said something very vital right there because in my time in the hospital, it seemed like if somebody passed, and then the mortician comes and take the body, it's like the next conversation that what's for lunch? We're going to get pizza. We're going to get burgers. We're going to get. It's like they just changed the conversation. It's like that seems very unreal to me. You know.
Well, I'll say in the moment, that's training kicking in, right? Because someone dies, there's another patient coming in. So you need to be for that patient. Like you need to be 100% for that patient. So in the moment, there's not a, in the moment, we don't stop to take an emotional inventory, an inventory of our emotions, right? We don't stop then. We keep moving. But for me, after the shift is over, uh, if there's some downtime, that's when or do my best to process that. But you're right. In the moment, it's like you're on. You just do this, and you have to move on.
Right.
We're
So,
professionals. Like you wouldn't want your doctor thinking about something else while
yeah,
they're
yeah,
caring
no,
for you, right?
yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. So what does self care look like for you? I mean, you mentioned therapy a lot in the book. I'm glad you mentioned therapy so much, and you gave defined details of what the sessions were even like, and kind of some of your resistance at certain points. Like I'm glad you put that in here for other black men to see. It's totally good to go to therapy. What's some other your self care practices that you practice?
Physical fitness. So I do work out pretty much every day. Do something. Uh, Time with my family. I mean, big part of my self care. So my wife keeps me straight. Like if I'm going left, she'll like, okay, you need to go. You need to go this way. Um, I read a lot. I do a lot of reading as part of my self care. For me, it's a lot of it's just mental stuff. I mean, I'm in my head a lot. I'm always thinking about things. So I say I kind of get out of my head a bit. So reading things, science fiction is an escapism. Still right. Trying to keep my body in shape and just connecting with my family.
There was one more question from the chat. It said, question for Dr. Williams. Where are you in your career today? And where do you see yourself in the near future? Practicing medicine, lobbying, surgeon general.
Well, I thank you for the endorsement for Surgeon General. Appreciate that. Certainly, we'll be practicing uh, medicine. However, it will be combining my practicing medicine with um, working to influence policy in some way that can impact populations in a positive way. Now, how that looks right now, is still to be determined. Check back with me in 6 months what that looks like. But what I want to do, there's no job description for it, as far as I know. I've looked, so I have to create my own thing. But I still want to be involved in taking care of patients. It gives me a lot of job satisfaction, and I feel it's important to have Black doctors in the medical field. But I also want to bridge that in a way that can have impact at a population level through impacting policy and creating policy that's actually helpful and not hurtful to the folks around me.
Yes, sir. Do you have any kind of closing advice for any of the young black doctors, anybody in medical school, anybody in the medical field, as far as their careers and just any advice you would give to them?
Yeah, so for the young doctors, young trainees, I will say this: you must hold on to your humanity, and you have to be intentional about this because as you go through this career, it really can just wring the humanity out of you. Just slowly, it's insidious, and you wake up one day you don't recognize yourself. So just make that an intentional practice. And if you're early on in your career, please reach out to me at my website brianwilliamsmd.com or on LinkedIn. I've held every educational job, program director, uh, selection committees, admission committees. I know it all, and I love just helping people out, giving some advice, or connecting with people that are
I
going through
love
it right
that.
now. So
Hey, y'all
you,
heard him.
you
Y'all
never
heard
turn
him.
away help, never, especially for young Black docs and Black doctor candidates.
Yes,
Get
sir.
connected with someone as early as possible and stick with them throughout your career. And
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing.
that's.
That's
And
amazing.
I'll say this last thing:
Yes, sir.
medicine has rewards like no other. Like there are rewards you get like no other. challenging for sure. A lot going on, but there's something about being able to change someone's life for the better that is hard to get from any other profession. So definitely well worth it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In closing, last one. This is a phenomenal book. I give it 5 stars. Totally.
But do you
Um,
do an Amazon review, Sean? Do you do an Amazon
I
review yet?
will. I
All right.
will. I
Let's
will.
let's make it help me out.
Yes, sir. Hey, hey, I got you. You got that tonight, sir. Tonight. Um, my question was, could we expect another book from you, like in the future? Are you going to write anything else, something else? That was so good. You can't do a one-off, man.
Yeah,
You can't do a
there'll
one
be
and
another
done.
book in the future. I've already been working on one. There's another book coming for sure, no doubt.
Well, but whenever you do
Let's get
that,
yeah.
you're definitely welcome back to the Sean P. Experience, the promo. Please come back. I definitely enjoyed the interview.
Yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch. But also for your audience, you figure this how you want to do this, Sean. I'm going to give away one signed copy of the book. I'll send it, but you figure out
Yes, sir.
who gets it and let me know, and I'll
Yes,
get that
sir.
in the mail as soon as possible.
Wow, y'all heard it, man. The autograph copy, man. We're gonna work on the details. Look out for it on the page. Thank y'all very much for another episode of the Sean P. Experience. Thanks to the audience for staying around. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your service. Everything you've done. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Sean. That's just a lot of fun. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Yes, sir.